Jalen Ortiz arrived at Ridgeview College hoping for a fresh start, but on his first night he heard whispers drifting from the dark corner of his dorm. Even though he lived alone and every door on the hallway had already been locked, he tried to ignore the sound. But the whisper shaped his name like someone hiding inside the walls calling him closer. Jalen turned off his lights and pretended to sleep, but the whisper crept louder until he felt cold breath brush the back of his neck. He spun around but saw nothing except the curtain shaking as if someone had just slipped behind it. He forced himself to stay still, but something crawled under his bed, scraping slow circles as if waiting for him to look down. Jalen focused on breathing until suddenly the whisper changed tone as if angry he wasn't reacting. Then the bed lifted an inch like someone was pushing upward from beneath. Jalen jumped off the mattress and ran to the door. But the handle twisted on its own, like someone was opening it from the hallway, even though no one was there. When the door cracked, the whisper rushed out into the hall, fading instantly. The next morning, Jalen reported the strange noise, but maintenance said the dorm used to house a student who disappeared inside that same room years before. When Jalen returned that night, the bed had moved 2 inches toward the window, even though he hadn't touched a thing. He packed his bag and slept in the study lounge for the rest of the week, and every time he passed his room, he heard the whisper say, "Welcome back through the wood." Jalen tried to focus on school, but the whispers followed him for weeks, so one evening he decided to study in the quiet basement of the campus library where almost no one went. The stairwell lights flickered as he descended, but he wasn't as scared until he reached the last step and heard footsteps behind him even though he knew he was alone. He turned around expecting another student, but the stairwell was empty. Jalen walked faster, but the footsteps followed him, matching his pace, growing heavier like something big was coming down after him. The lights buzzed. Then the entire basement fell into darkness except for the dim glow of an old emergency bulb far across the room. As Jalen tried to walk toward the exit, something started breathing in the dark aisles between the bookshelves. He froze when a long shadow stretched across the floor. Even should have created it. The shadow's head tilted at an unnatural angle as if broken. Jalen whispered hello, hoping it was a student playing a prank. But the shadow rushed toward him without making a sound, forcing him to sprint back up the stairs. As he ran, the footsteps chased him, climbing faster, almost overtaking him, until he burst through the library door where the lights finally returned. He looked back, but the stairwell was empty and silent. The librarian asked why he was sweating, and when he mentioned the basement, she said the basement had been closed off years ago after a security guard vanished while patrolling the exact level Jalen had just been on. Jalen began avoiding buildings at night, so he often took the long way back to his dorm by crossing the small wooded trail behind the science department. One night, fog covered the ground and the woods were so quiet he could hear the crunch of every leaf under his shoes. Halfway through the trail, he saw a figure standing perfectly still between 2 trees, wearing a torn college hoodie that looked decades old. Jalen tried to walk past, but the figure slowly lifted its arm and pointed at him like it had been waiting. Jalen backed away, but the fog swirled around the figure and he saw its face for a split second. Gray, stretched, and completely hollow where the eyes should have been. Jalen tried to run, but the figure split into 3 shadows that moved around him, circling like predators. No matter which direction he turned, a shadow blocked him. He screamed for help, but his voice vanished in the fog as if something swallowed the sound. Jalen forced himself to sprint blindly through the trees until he fell onto the main path, bruised and shaking. When he looked back, the woods were silent again, and no footprints followed him out. A campus officer later explained the trail had been the site of several disappearances from the 1980s, mostly students who went missing during winter nights when the fog was heaviest. Jalen decided he needed to transfer or drop out, but on the night he packed his belongings, the whisper returned stronger than ever. His entire room vibrated like something massive was crawling inside the walls. His lights flicked off by themselves and the temperature dropped so fast his breath turned white. The whisper shifted into a voice deep and distorted, saying, "Don't leave me again," and his closet door creaked open even though he hadn't touched it. Inside the closet, a hand formed out of darkness, long and thin, gripping the doorframe as if pulling itself into the room. Jalen rushed toward the exit. But the door slammed shut on its own and locked. The bed slid across the floor, blocking his path, and the whisper crawled under his skin like it was inside his mind. Jalen screamed, "Stop!" and the room went silent for 3 seconds before the voice said, "Stay." The darkness in the closet lunged forward, reaching for his ankle. Jalen kicked free and grabbed his suitcase. He ran across campus without stopping until he reached the main gate. The moment he stepped onto the street outside campus, days later, the school announced the dorm building was being closed for structural issues. But students whispered that a shadowy figure still walked the halls at night, calling out the name of whoever stayed in Jalen E.'s old room.